Welcome to UnityNow, the podcast where we discuss unity in the face of division. Inspired by the Unity 2020 plan, we strive to unite Americans by highlighting the middle ground between the two dominant parties and promoting the individual over groups. Each episode, we will bring you exciting, well-informed guests and host nuanced conversations about politically charged subjects. Our goal is to bring an end to the ideological war threatening the collective well-being of this great country.
And now, please welcome Bruce Bond to the UnityNow podcast, CEO and co-founder of the Common Ground Committee. Bruce, thanks so much for joining us.
You're welcome, and I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for inviting me, Toby.
Yeah, my pleasure. We know you're a busy guy out there trying to solve the world's problems with the Common Ground Committee, and we appreciate you taking just maybe an hour or so to talk with us. We gave our audience a little bit of a background on a pre-recorded introduction. But if you could tell us, basically, to get started, about the Common Ground Committee and why you thought such a committee was necessary.
Happy to answer that. The Common Ground Committee is about bringing healing to the problems of polarization and incivility in our political discourse. We do that through a number of mechanisms. The primary ones are that we do events where we bring people of opposite sides of an issue together, either on stage or on a virtual stage, if it's online. And they discuss an issue with an eye more toward finding points of agreement and whether they can work out toward a solution, as opposed to winning the debate, if you will. Mm-hmm. We have podcasts a podcast series called Let's Find Common Ground that now has over 60 episodes, and we have about 60,000. Well, we know it's more than 60,000 on two platforms alone. We have over 60,000 followers on that. And similar to the events, but there's more of a personal story that's usually involved in the podcast. And our third primary programming activity is something we call the Common Ground Scorecard, which is a tool for voters that when they're looking to make a voting decision, they can look at the degree to which a politician is likely to work with people from across the aisle. So those that care about finding common ground with having their politicians find common ground, it's something that helps them evaluate that when they're about to cast a ballot.
Great, thank you. Excuse me. And I'm curious myself, how it all got started. When did you notice, because we mentioned you have 30 plus years in information management. And then when did you notice you needed to start, something like Common Ground Committee?
It was in 2009, to be specific.
Okay.
My co-founder and I, a guy named Eric Olson, little background on us. Eric and I met each other when I was in 6th grade and he was in 7th. So we've been around. Oh, wow. We've been friends for forever. Our families were close friends. My dad and his dad were good buddies. And so there's just a lot of history there. And we had been talking really since Obama got elected and had taken office in January 2009. In our conversations, we talked a lot. We lived nearby each other. Just socially, we saw each other a lot. And a common theme that we kept coming back to was the fact that the tone of political conversation had really taken a turn for the worse, in our view. It was no longer a question of where you and I might disagree on something, and that's okay, we disagree. It was now a point where if you and I disagree, there's something wrong with your character. Yeah. And that was disturbing to us. And so in August of 2009, his wife and they came up to our summer place, and we were out on a walk. It was vacation time, enjoying ourselves, and we start up this conversation that ultimately acknowledged again that we were concerned about this, sort of a determination to, rather than just talk about it, do something about it. And the idea of getting people of note together on stage to debate an issue, people from opposite sides of the question, to get them on stage, to have the conversation with more of a focus towards, okay, we're going to disagree on these things, but where can we agree? We felt that was badly needed. To be honest, Toby, we weren't sure that the audience would go along with that. That our sort of instinct on that this was something that was badly needed, that people were in agreement, would be in agreement with us. But when we did the hard work and the heavy lifting, we put our first event on in February of 2010, and it was a hit. People loved it. They talked to us immediately afterward, both in person at the event and in communications afterward, about how this is so needed. We need this kind of thing in a big way. We hope you do more. And so we did. But of course, the problem was we had day jobs, both of us in important positions in the various companies we were in. And so, it was an avocation at that time. We were very passionate about it. But the bottom line was we only had the bandwidth to put an event together once a year. That's not what we thought in the beginning, but in fact, that's what it turned out to be. And so it was sort of like, we get the event, we present it, it feels great, everybody's really happy about it, we get great feedback, and we know we're on the right path. And then, we take the deep breath and go, phew, that's over. Let's, get the funding to pay off the things we haven't paid off yet. Get that done, and then we'll start up shortly. Well, shortly would inevitably be about a year later. So we did that really up until about late 2017, early 2018. Make long story short, there we got some funding. We got some significant funding, and so me initially, and then Eric went full time with Common Ground Committee. And that's where we are now. We have staff. We put on multiple events a year. Like I said, we've got our podcast and our Common Ground Scorecard. So it's really ramped up, and we're just really grateful to still be here and to be seeing the progress that we're making.
Well, that's great. That's great to see. It's one thing to recognize the need for, to recognize a problem, right? And it's another thing to recognize there needs to be solutions. This was a whole other thing to try to take on those solutions. So that's great for you guys to take that on.
Thanks.
You talked about the events, how you got started. I noticed a few events looking around your website. People like General Petraeus, Susan Rice. Tell us about, some of the events, how they go, and some of the topics that you have the folks discuss.
Yeah, each event has its own character, its own set of fun, and so there are a zillion things I could tell you about. I'll tell you about two that are sort of favorites of mine.
Okay.
In 2016, as the election approached in the summer, we organized an event on taxes, finding common ground on taxes, with Congressman Barney Frank of Massachusetts, a liberal Democrat, and Larry Kudlow, the host of his own, Kudlow and Company television program at the time. Okay. He was not yet in the Trump administration, but he was being considered for it. And so there was, shall we say, some electricity associated with that. Sure. And of course, Barney Frank of, Dodd-Frank bill and so forth. For those of your listeners who don't know who he is, at the time he was an icon, really, in the House, and the first openly gay member of the House of Representatives. Very outspoken, interesting guy. And as the event came together, we got a call. I got a call from Barney, and he called me and he said, "Look, just so you know, I'm not a common ground guy. My view is Larry and I are going to go up there on stage, and we're going to have a great debate, and we'll let the voters decide what the deal is." I'm like, okay, I respect that, but the one thing I ask is that the conversation be respectful, and that you can be as passionate as you want, but no ad hominems and all that kind of thing. He said, Don't worry about that. He and I respect each other. It's not going to be a problem. So I said, all right, great. Let's give it a shot. And of course, meanwhile, I'm thinking, what if they don't find any common ground, right?
Right.
So, that's going through my head on this thing. So we have the event. They get out there on stage. And Toby, I'm telling you, it was just unbelievable. Something we do is we track points of common ground found during our events.
Okay.
Well, they agreed on 26 different items.
Wow.
Which just blew us away. Now, some of it was like, duh, right? So they agreed that the tax code was too complicated. Well, who doesn't agree with that, right? So there was some of that. But I would say the highlight of it was when they cut a tax deal on stage where Larry got his 15% corporate tax rate and Barney got cuts or increases to personal tax rates. And they figured out how they would do that. It was a thing of beauty. And the audience, they gave him a big round of applause when they did that. And afterwards, Barney, when I went up to him, said, wow, this is terrific. You guys did such a great job. And his eyes got as big as saucers. And he said, this was amazing. He said, you've got to do this more often. You've got to get on the road with this. You've got to go to college. He just had all this sort of these big ideas about what we could do. And it was very, very exciting. And that led us down a different path, actually, where we did start going to college campuses, almost not exclusively, but heavily. And so, which leads to the second event I'll mention here, which was the one at University of Notre Dame in March of 2019 with John Kerry and Condi Rice, two renowned individuals, secretaries of state, who interestingly had never appeared on stage together before, except when the portrait of Condi Rice was unveiled at the State Department in Washington, and Kerry, who was in office at the time, he was the Secretary of State. He was sort of the master of ceremonies of that ceremony. And that was it. And they had a fabulous discussion. I mean, it was just, it was loaded with, okay, we're not going to agree on this point, but here's where we do. And they talked about Korea and China, and there was climate change from a global perspective. It was remarkable. And I think maybe most powerful for me personally was both of them delivered really strong admonitions, if you will, to the students. You guys got to vote. You got to get out there and you got to make a difference out there, because we're depending on you. Forget about party. Get involved. It's your job to do that. And it was really inspiring. We have some clips now, you can find them on our website, of students that were just like, holy smokes, we thought, my words, not theirs, this was going to be a food fight. And that's not what we found. That's not what happened. And the reason for that is that when we do events, we do what I like to call, we create the petri dish in which the good stuff can grow. We don't stack the deck. We don't say, we're going to ask this question, we want you to answer in this. We don't do any of that. We tell them more or less what the topics, the subtopics are going to be. And we set up the conversation with clips, and a video clip or a graphic or whatever to sort of start things off. We don't know where the conversation is going to go, but they know in their heart of hearts why they're there. And they embrace it. And those guys did a fabulous job. It was really good. So I can give you stories on each of them, but I'll just stop with those two.
Well, that's great to hear. And it's, it's glad to hear they were also surprised at their ability, and they already thought before they're going in, they were not going to find common ground, like you said. But they were, like you said, Barney was surprised. Do you think it's because they never have individual conversations with people like that and sit down slowly and quietly to talk like they were doing there?
In a sense, yes. I think that the issue is, I think there are two major factors in this. Number one is, you know how our news media works today, right? If you're going to be in news, you got 5 minutes, right? If you're going to be in a clip in a news program, you got 5 minutes. And the expectation is that you're going to debate your point of view. You don't have time to reach across the aisle in those situations. So this gets out of that situation, right? Because they got a whole hour to have these conversations. The other thing is we've noticed this with pretty much everybody involved. People in these positions, in leadership positions, they are in those positions because they got in them because they wanted to make a difference. They wanted to move the ball forward on these things. And they're as frustrated with the partisanship as anybody. And so this gives them an opportunity to kind of put that aside and say, let's make a deal. How would we work through this? Where are the things where we can agree and so forth? And that energizes them. I can just tell you, after the Kerry Rice event, they actually flew together to the second time they were going to be on stage together, which immediately followed ours the next day. And I was getting texts from their handler who was on the plane with them, who was saying, you wouldn't believe this. They are raving about the experience they just had. They had so much fun that they had the ability to kind of break out of the norm and just talk about what they felt and how, we could fix problems. And it was amazing. It was so cool. And most of the vast majority of the speakers that we've had, they feel the same way. Some with, different levels of enthusiasm than others, but they all are grateful for the experience and feel like the event they had was just a wonderful experience. So.
Wow. Have you had a bad event where people could not find common ground or, got angry at each other or anything like that?
It's funny you asked that. At the last live event we had before the pandemic hit, we had Chris Wallace and at the time Fox News and Maggie Haberman of the New York Times, who was the number one Trump reporter, if you will. And in the green room, I was having a conversation with Chris Wallace and more or less told him the same thing about, the people expecting the food fight. And his question was, so what do you do when you have a food fight? How do you respond? And I sat there for a minute and I go, Chris, we've never had one. and we haven't. We have never had a food fight. Sure. Yeah. People have, they disagree about things and sometimes passionately, but it's never personal. And it's always like, we're not going to agree on this, but here's where we can agree. It's because they get into the spirit of it. It's not about planting the flag. It's about, moving forward down the trail. They get it.
Wow. Well, that's great. And so how many events have you been able to have now since 2017 or so?
Well, you could do the math quickly. I think we've done 17 events now. And so, 2009 to 2018 was 9 of those. So I think we've done 8.
Okay.
8 or 9 since then.
Yeah.
And that includes the pandemic years where, the pandemic threw
virtual.
That threw us a curveball. I mean, that event I just told you about with Wallace and Haberman, the only thing we were doing at that time was events. That's it. We didn't have a podcast, we didn't have the score, we had none of that. Literally days after the event with Haberman and Wallace, the country shut down, more or less.
Yeah.
And so we weren't able to do live events. And so we had to pivot. And, I have to say, I'm not only grateful, but I'm really proud of the organization I'm a part of, where we were able to pivot and take our time, effort, and resources and put them into new initiatives, podcast and scorecard, things we had sort of aspired to do, but didn't have the time or the money, the budget to do it. Suddenly we did, because the money we had for events, couldn't spend it, right? So that put us in a position to make a change. And, we responded really quickly. I mean, that was February of 2020 when the thing hit, right? Really March is when. So in April, we produced our first podcast. And from April through now, we've produced, without fail, another podcast every other week on Thursdays. We come out. Wow. We've been religious about that, and we've been successful. And we have a professional podcast crew that produces it. I will add, one of the things that's made us successful is the quality of our production. Our producer for our events is an Emmy Award-winning news program winner. Okay. And so, talk about what does good look like, she knows.
Yeah.
And we have professional podcast people that do our podcast. You will never see Eric or me moderate. Well, I should say never. We've done a couple of really small events where I moderated, but and I'm fine at it, but I know the value of getting the right people, and our producer is really good about that, about getting the thing to work the way it should. And so we like to see the pros do those things, and so we'll make the effort to get those people in the loop. But anyway, the pandemic there was a silver lining there for us, because now we have these three primary lines of programming and outreach, and they're all successful, and that's something that like I said, we're grateful that we got through it and we came out better on the other side.
Right. Yeah. That's good to hear. And I don't know if you've ever heard this, but almost the average podcasts only go up to 9 episodes. We looked at that when we got to our 50th episode. So
yeah,
congratulations,
great job on
by
that.
The way. Yeah, thank you. And congratulations to you guys being able to pivot. I wonder how many podcasts started in 2020. We started in 2020, but not because of COVID, because of the 2020 election. But I wonder, there's probably so many more as well. Not that there's not a lot of them.
Well, it wasn't that long ago. People didn't know what a podcast is.
Exactly. And
right.
It's,
now it's in the vernacular. Everybody knows what it is.
Growth, right.
Yeah.
So you mentioned the Common Ground Scorecard a couple times as well. So this is a scorecard you've built. It's on your website. I've checked it out. You can search a politician. You can go to a U.S. map, select congressional districts. So tell us about this, where it came from, and how the score works. I'm curious. Yeah.
Yeah. So a few things on this. Back in 2013, we came up with the idea, and the thought was the rubber meets the road when people in power actually seek to work with other people, and that was a problem. It wasn't happening. And so we thought, if we thought about this, we could actually put a score together, but we weren't 100% sure how to do it. And we decided at the time not to spend time, effort, and money doing it, because we didn't have any of any of those things, because we were so focused on events. Well, when COVID hit, we had to stop events, and not entirely, because we were able to do, virtual events, different animal, but different enough that we could pursue the scorecard. Okay. We got some people, a group of people together from a couple people from inside and some people from outside, and put a project team together and developed. One guy in particular came up with the blueprint for the model on how it would work, and the key elements of it are really behaviors and communication. Okay. So as opposed to, some sort of statistical model type of thing, we're looking to see what people say about working with others. You can score some good points if you talk about working with people from the other side, and you can lose points if you criticize people personally. And don't display, if you will, the behaviors that we're after. The score ultimately goes from 0 to 100. 100 meaning, you're the ultimate common grounder. We use that term, common grounders. And 0 means you got a ways to go, right? Right. We have you can get bonus points. So you actually technically could get a score of 110. And you can also lose points. So you could actually get a score of -20. And we have had both. We've had people who've gone over 100, and we have people that have scored -20. And there still are those folks. If you go out to the site, you will see that.
I may have looked. And one particular name, I had to look, Mr. Trump.
Yep.
Yeah. And I think he's right there at -20, if I'm correct.
He's a -20 guy. And you know what?
Yeah.
In all fairness, I think that's where he'd want to be.
Probably.
He's a kick the table over kind of guy. and it's why he got elected by the folks that support him. And so, I mean, we've said this to a number of folks that have asked about it. If you want to find folks that are more inclined to, walk the party line and to, rally around the party and classify the other party as the bad guys, if that's what you're after, you can use the scorecard to tell you that. It's just you're looking at the other end of the scale.
Yeah.
Right. And so there's that sort of dual purpose. We're grateful to say that from what we can tell so far, people are using it for the one that we originally intended it for.
Okay.
But yeah, so that's I could go into detail. I don't know if your listeners would want to see all that, but if you go to our or hear all that, if you go to the website, our commongroundcommittee.org, and you click on the Common Ground Scorecard up at the top of the page, it'll take you to the screen, and there's a FAQs, and there's a complete description of exactly how we put the score together in detail. But the big point is behaviors, communication, and also the degree to which you have sponsored legislation with, at least if you're in Congress, if you sponsored legislation with somebody from the other side. I will note that the scorecard does include, it's kind of at the federal level, all members of Congress, those that are challenging them in an election, the president and vice president, and also all the state governors and their challengers as well.
Okay.
That's in it. We have aspirations to go to a state legislature level. And we're developing some software to help us do that, because collecting the information for that is really hard and time consuming. So we're trying to automate that process a little bit. But we think we're going to be successful with that. And so then we'll be able to include that. But high level, U.S. Congress, governors, president, vice president, score of 0 to 100, more or less. Check it out and see. Look at your district, because it'll show you there who you're going to be voting for in 2022, or who's going to be on the ballot, I should say, and then you can make your decision. There's information there about, just quick bio, what the experience has been, and the scores of the individual components that make up the total score, so you can see where they have strengths and maybe not as strong in different areas.
So on something like that, which sounds like an extremely useful tool for, I don't know what voter would not want to use that, but maybe, we look at an extreme question like somebody regulating speech. So the question is, well, who could we ask to regulate speech? Who could actually be the judge of that? So how do you guys answer that question? What makes you guys a good judge, or the score? Why is that a good, score for those people? Is it not, partisan one way, one left or right,
Yeah, I'm really glad you asked this question, because one of our principles is we are nonpartisan. And I will tell you, Toby, we spend a lot of time and effort making sure that in our communication, in our work, we do not accidentally send a signal that says we lean left or we lean right. That's really important. It's crucial to our brand. The instant we take a position on an issue, immediately we got problems. The point is to bring people together, and as soon as we take a position, people are going to say, no. What you're really interested in is getting your own policies, the policies you care about, implemented. And that's not what we're about. So to that's the scorecard embraces that as well. If you look at the people, both the top vote getter or the top scoring individuals and the bottom scoring individuals, it's a mix of Democrats and Republicans, right, across the board. So we do not give points or take points away for where you might stand on an issue. And you mentioned the notion of cancel culture and free speech and that sort of thing. That is an issue. And you can imagine that, in an organization like ours, we value free speech, but we don't take a position by saying, if you prevent someone from coming to your campus, for example, you're a bad guy. We don't say that because people that do that have very strong, heartfelt reasons for why they feel that that's really important. And if we came out and said, no, you're wrong about that, now we're shooting ourselves in the foot here in terms of what we're trying to accomplish from our mission. It's about working together. It's not about, it's so that you can find a solution. It's not about, here's the solution we want you to adopt, right? And so the scorecard is issue free, if you will. It doesn't, we do not give points for your position on any issue.
Yeah, and I even noticed, I forget the name of him, but whoever your number one Common Ground person was, even tweeted.
Don Bacon.
Yeah, he tweeted about it, and
he did.
Yeah, he was happy to be there. Yeah,
yeah, and we were delighted that he did that. He has been from very early on either the top guy or very, very close to being the top guy. Yeah,
okay,
that's right. I think his latest score is 104.
Wow.
So he's doing. Yeah, he does very well there.
Yeah, I think transparency is key in something like this because, of course, you want it to grow and you want more people to look at it. I'm sure you're tracking how many people go to your website.
We are, yeah.
And as it grows, people that are not Common Ground people might just blame you, like, those guys are partisan left, they're blue, they're red, they're, whatever. I'm sure that's going to happen if it already hasn't happened.
It happens, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it definitely happens.
I think
a lot of it has to do with people say, well, they didn't say this, so therefore they are.
Sure. Yeah.
Right. It's that kind of thing. And, that's going to happen. But here's a good judge of this. We have very active social media, and I'm grateful to say, tens of thousands of followers. And when we'll put out something, make a post and whatever, let's just take Facebook, for example. If we post something in Facebook, I like to look at, the likes, and you've got the different symbols, right? There's the like, and then there's the angry face, right? All of that, right?
Yep.
And what we find now is that it'll be like, 175 likes and 3 angry faces. So you look at the angry face comments, and the angry face comments are, you guys are lefties, or you guys are, white supremacists, or whatever it might be.
Right.
And we do get accused of all of these things.
Wow.
But it is, I look at that, I'm like, most people get it. And if we can just keep that going, we're in good shape. There's always going to be a detractor along the way. It's just how it is.
Right. And that's why, go ahead.
I was going to say, we'd like to invite them in and, have the conversation and that sort of thing. But sometimes you have to say, we're going to agree to disagree on this one. But, let's have a debate on the merits or whatever it might be. So.
Yeah. I had an interview with Isaac Saul, who does the Tangle newsletter. I don't know if you've ever heard of him. And he was talking about our name, UnityNow. And he's like, look, I'm not trying to get to utopia or anything. And I was like, well, we aren't either. And maybe we should have been more careful about choosing the name of our podcast. But Common Ground's a great name because that's kind of what we're trying to do as well. It's not about utopia. And like you said, not getting 100% of everyone agreeing on everything. It's just about finding some common ground on probably most issues. There is some common ground everyone can find if they slow down and take a look.
Yeah, that's been our experience. I mean, even the most divisive issues like abortion, for example, where people have very, very strong views and for truly heartfelt reasons. You may disagree, but the positions they have are not, the vast majority, they're not unreasonable, given the person's background, experience, the things that they've seen in their lives, that sort of thing. So, but even there, most people, and we saw what happened in Kansas. It was surprising that basically to a lot of folks that, the referendum there basically said, we think abortion should be legal, but as to quote President Clinton, should be legal but rare. You know, and that's that's the way most of the country views the situation. So those things are there to be found. And I'll just quickly tell you the sort of a comment we got from one of the events we did with Barney Frank, because I think we've done 3 with him. He said, look, it's important to disagree. It's really important to disagree, because when you disagree, you're coming from different perspectives. And when you can sit at the table and say, look, we don't agree on this. Well, why don't you agree? Because, that puts you in a position where, he used the phrase, you can separate, the dross from the gold. And you can get to a position now and a policy that actually is better, because, the two sides of, or whatever this number of sides, there could be more than 2, actually had an intelligent, heartfelt, let's move the ball forward discussion that allowed them to take into account the multiple constituencies that are going to be affected by whatever the policy is. And that's a good thing. That's the way the framers intended it to work. And so, that doesn't mean that you're unified in the way you view the world, to your point about unity. But what it does say is that you're unified in your desire to make progress on the issue, and that there are points in there that you can be unified on, where there is common ground. And the art of good governing is to find those things.
Yeah, precisely. And I was going to ask you about third parties, and especially the it's not new to us, but the new Forward Party, led by Andrew Yang, which now is combined, with 2 other parties, Renew America and the Sam Party. Yeah. If you've heard of that, if you're tracking that, if and if there are plans to add candidates like that into the scorecard.
Yeah. So the answer is yes. The plan is to bring them in there. I mean, we have some standards before we do bring someone in, but we have every expectation that it's not going to be long before we have a forward candidate in there. Okay. It's important that we do that, I think.
Yeah, because this is a question I've heard this described, and I want to ask people this: do we actually have 2 different parties right now? If you take out the marketing, the red and the blue, and the donkey and the elephant, and the names Republican, Democrat, and even conservative and liberal, take all that away, and you look at what the parties are doing to serve their voters, do we actually even have 2 different parties at this point?
Well, so there are different ways to answer that question. In fact, we do have 2 different parties. And how do we know that? Because if you're going to have a presidential debate, which there's a question about that. I think the Republicans have said at this point that they're not really interested in doing presidential debates this time around for 2024. But if there was one, you'd have a Democrat and you'd have a Republican, because they represent these 2, they are the 2, if you will, dominant in thinking anyway, in our thought about American politics. They are the dominant parties, but neither of them have a majority of the electorate. In fact, the largest party is not really a party; it's independents. And so, what does that tell you? People, not real satisfied with the 2-party system. But even within the 2 parties, you got all sorts of factions. We know all about that. The progressive left. What used to be called the Tea Party, now the Freedom Caucus, within the Republican Party. And so, you might argue that there are effectively really 4, 2 in each of the 2 big ones, right? And then there are the independents that I would just say it's not a given that they're all going to go with the Forward Party, because the research shows that sometimes the independents, usually the independents actually are more partisan than the people in the party. They tend to vote a particular party line. They just don't like to say that, right?
Right. So. That's true. I've seen that. I'm in Indianapolis. I've seen that with our independent candidates here as well. So that I understand that. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. And like we were talking about on our podcast, an issue like UBI, might be a major issue with Forward Party. But we looked after they combined the three, and they've taken UBI off their website. So maybe they're doing what you're talking about. They're trying to find the common ground because they want to help be part of the solution, and not necessarily just elect their candidate just to say they did.
Yeah, I think that's right. I do sense from the individuals involved that they're trying to create a place that's a home for people that don't feel like they're at home in the parties that they've been supporting. They've been supporting the parties because it's the best choice, if you will, but not a great choice. There's the notion of strong party loyalty amongst the citizenry has diminished over time, and this is an effort, I think, to say, okay, it turns out, as you head towards, on a number of different issues, there's a lot more common ground, as we've said, and those sort of common ground positions are going to be the platform of our party, and therefore, there's a place for you here. And how successful are they going to be? It's going to be very hard because change is difficult, and the system, if you will, and I know that's an overused term, but the electoral system we have makes it pretty hard for new parties to get started. And there's a lot of electoral reform that needs to take place for it to be easier. They've got some good people in place there, though, and I think it would be good for the country. I know there are people that disagree with me on this, but I think it would be good for the country if they had some success. I'd love to see a 3-person, debate, if you will, in 2024, or even 4 if the Libertarian Party could kind of get their, themselves organized, which is difficult. They tend to, actually, I shouldn't quote the research on that because I'm not 100% sure of this, but my gut says that they tend to lean more conservative. Libertarians, not necessarily, but in any event, so they tend to be in the Republican Party. But having a third, at least a third up there, I think would be good for the country. I really do. We'll see.
Yeah, I agree. And if what they're saying is true, it's not necessarily about having a president, in 2024. But it's about local elections and state. So maybe it's good because the Common Ground Scorecard can help everybody understand, what's going on locally. I keep saying this. It's like, if you look at it and think about it, the president doesn't actually usually, and it's a little different now, but it doesn't usually affect your life a lot. Look at your local elections. Look at your governor. Look at your state represents. Look at your Congress people. And if I have this right, there's 469 seats that are open with this midterms, this year. And so, they need to look at your website to know what's going on.
Yeah, I would just, and I obviously I agree with you. I would say that I would just remind folks we're not yet at the state and local level.
Right. Okay.
We're still at the federal level. We have aspirations to get there, but like I said, it requires some automation for us to be able to do that. So we're working on that, but we're not quite there yet. But your point is well taken. The state and local elections tend to have more immediate impact on, your own personal situation than the national ones do. Not always, but usually. The issue is that, all of the media energy, if you will, is around the national side of things. And when people sort of identify where they are politically, they usually do that in the context of what's happening nationally.
Right.
One of the things I've noticed is that, when Tip O'Neill back in the 70s basically said, all politics are local, and everybody thought, oh, you know what, that's right. And that was the case. That's different now. You could make a good case that says all politics are now national because that's how people identify. And that you could have a healthy debate about that, but certainly in terms of when people have conversations, they tend to be on national issues more than they are on a local one, unless it's an issue of enormous impact in that particular community or state.
Yeah, I probably would not argue with that. You're right. It is a lot of things like abortion, obviously on a national level, big problems.
And
so,
huge for identification. I mean, the turnout in Kansas was as interesting, if you will. The huge turnout was as interesting as the results.
Exactly. Right. Yeah, I remember when it came out. Okay, so tell us about any upcoming events you guys have, or new things you're doing. What's coming with Common Ground?
So I'm unfortunately, if we did this a week later, I could give you the details about our next event, but there are some contracts and things involved that we're working on, and so I can't quite give that to you. But I can tell you that we are at this point zeroing in on an event that, if all things come together, it will take place on the 27th of September. It'll be on a college campus, and the people that are going to be the panelists are household names, and it's going to be really good. So I can't wait for it to happen. So that's our first live in-person event since COVID hit. So we're very, very excited about that.
That's great.
And we have some other events that we're working on. We try to maintain a cadence now where more or less every other month we have an event planned. They don't always work out that way because, you have to really put three things together for that to happen. You have to have the speakers, you have to have the venue, you have to have the topic, and all those things have to kind of work together. And, they, for whatever reason, sometimes all three of them don't align. So, but what we're trying to do is be on a cadence of every 6 to 8 weeks, we'd have another event, whether it be online or in person. But I think we've got a lot of heavy lifting right now around podcast work that is anticipating the election that's coming up. And also focusing on some of the issues that we're concerned about, climate versus economy. When we talk about issues, by the way, we talk about the false dichotomies. Can we have positive impact on climate and not, destroy the economy? The answer is yes, we can.
Yeah.
And so we think about it in that way. So some of the issues that we're concerned about, where we think there's opportunity for common ground that, people may think there isn't.
Yeah.
So we're doing some of that. And then the scorecard is probably the center of our focus right now because we have a really important election coming up here on November 8th. And so we are building a program. Well, no, the program's built. We're in the middle of deploying the promotional elements to bring awareness to it and so forth. And there's a timing element. It's a little early right now because, people are sort of vaguely thinking about the vote, but the primaries aren't all over yet. And so, as we go forward, you're going to see more and more discussion and conversation from us, hopefully in the press and so forth, about the scorecard.
Yeah.
And I can tell you this, we've gotten enormous uptake from Congress on it.
Wow.
Where there is one element in the scorecard that the representative or the governor can earn extra points by essentially affirming that they will be conducting themselves in their political discourse in a certain way. And we have this thing on our website called the 10 Attributes of Common Grounders. And basically, it's that set of principles in political dialogue. And so if they affirm that's how they're going to, that is how they're engaging and how they will engage, they get points. And of course, if we catch them not doing that, they lose the points. But there's that little incentive in there for them to step up here, and it's not that hard, right? And it's been great. The various congressional offices, in particular, and some of the governors have been in touch with us about this. They have questions and so forth, but this year so far, I think we've got already, I think we are over the 30 mark of congressional members who said, yep, I'm on board. And
Oh, wow.
and they are, some of them are actually saying, I'd like to help promote this with my colleagues, to have them do this as well. So so that's encouraging, because when you have members of Congress that are really interested in something like this, when we think about our nation being so polarized, and they are eager to say, that's not me, that's very encouraging. That's something that, gives one hope and inspiration.
That is. I should have asked you before. Did you guys send them their scores, or are they heard about it from somebody else?
No. We're very intentional about this when we do our work. And by the way, it's sort of an unknown thing in the public where, let's just talk about Congress for the moment. Mm-hmm. In Congress, they get, everybody in this, every industry, every political issue, activists around it particularly, they send these documents to the congressional office saying, fill this out so that we can give you our score for how good you are in this area. And it's, it takes like a couple of days for folks to fill these things out, right? So we don't do that. We do the work ourselves. And we collect the information, we come up with our score, and then we send it to them and we say, here's what we came up with for you. And by the way, if we left something out or we have mischaracterized something here, here's your chance to tell us we didn't do it right. Because we're not interested in, obviously we like to see the scores be as high as they could be, but we're interested in the truth according to our model, right? We want the model to be as accurate as possible. That's what we're all about. So we encourage folks, the folks in the offices, to take a look at it and set us straight if we've done something that's not right. And so far that hasn't happened. We haven't had anybody. Of course, a number of them have said, well, did you know that he did this or she did that or what have you? And we're like, yes, that is built in.
So we knew that. Yeah,
those kinds of things. Yeah, and good for them, right?
Right.
That's their job. That's what they should do.
That means, they know it's important. Yeah,
they do. And so then, if once it's set, they have we say, okay, so this is the score we're going to go with. We have some categories, things like who's the top scorer in a given state, who are the top 10 scorers, and that sort of thing. And we'll actually put together a boilerplate press release for them that says, Joe Congressperson scored in the top 10, and here's, you fill in the quote, and we'll help you go out to your local press to get this done. Because and we don't care if they're Republicans or Democrats. We don't care where they stand on the various issues. But if they're doing the stuff that the country needs, if they're reaching across the aisle and they're working to drive solutions, we want to highlight their work. It's not an endorsement. We don't endorse politicians, but we do want to highlight the work of those people that are getting it done. And it would be great if all members of Congress were doing that, because we would be spending all day communicating with people saying, look at these folks, they're doing it right. We would love to be in that position. Unfortunately, the average, I told you before, for everybody in the scorecard, it goes from 0 to 100. The average is 29, which is not good.
Yeah,
it's not good.
Do you know, can you say how many of that is across all people? How many total people that is?
It's in the 500s. I think it's like 536, something like that.
Sense.
It's right around there. I'm sorry I don't have the number, but I mean, you can count them, right? The 50 state governors, the president, the vice president, and the sitting Congress people.
Yeah.
But now that effectively doubles because we've added the challengers
for
races. Their roles.
Right.
So, and not everybody is running. Mm-hmm. I get that, right? But so it's a lot of people.
And I imagine you're eventually you want to track, how it's affecting everything, right? So the people that go up on the score, and then does it affect the elections and affect the voters for them? Have you seen any effects from your scores? in the nation?
So it's hard to point to any causality here.
Right.
So I'm not going to go so far as to say that's happening. But what I will tell you is that just preliminarily, and we don't have a large enough data set yet because we're still going through the primaries and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But what we're finding is that those people that score high are actually doing better than those that don't so far when it comes to winning their primaries and that sort of thing. You know, I don't, there's just not enough data to say for sure this is happening. But, you know, preliminarily, it's encouraging. But I will say this, you know, there's a study that was just put out by Georgetown University called, it's their battleground poll. Okay. And one of the findings in their work was that 68%, and this is a quote, I wrote this down, 68% of voters say they were more likely to vote for a candidate willing to compromise with others to get things done. That's a big deal, right? Right. These days, that is a big deal. Now, of course, what voters actually do and what they say aren't always the same thing. Right. But it sort of echoes the sentiment, Toby, that people are tired. I don't know if you're familiar with the More in Common study that was done in 2018, which, you know, big deep dive on the American electorate that, among other things, found that we still had the vocal minorities. You know, it used to be vocal minorities, you know, 20% on the left, 20% on the right, and then you had the silent majority in the middle, right? The 60%.
Yeah.
Well, that silent majority, first of all, they found a 67%. Secondly, that's now called the exhausted majority.
Right.
And you know, I really don't need to explain that. Everybody knows what that means, right? People are just tired of what the status quo is. So this is another
majority, the exhausted middle. Yeah, we've talked about that.
And in fact, you know what's interesting in the study is the exhausted majority includes people from all the spectra, if you will, all ends of the spectra of the and all points of along the political spectrum. You know, diehard conservatives, diehard progressives are parts of the exhausted majority. It's just that they're not the vocal minorities. They're not the people that are out there doing the protests and, you know, expressing the anger and the rancor that's out there. That's not them. But they are still, you know, on different sides. But the implication is that there's a recognition that there's going to be disagreement, but let's get on with it and make some progress. Let's move forward. And so this is what this Georgetown poll is backing up, if you will, is that sentiment that says, you know, we're not going to agree on things. But right now, I want to get somebody in office that is going to get the 20%. We're not going to get 80 or 100%. We're going to get 20% of the issue that we care about to move forward. And you know what? That's better than what we've been getting. Now, of course, recently there's been a flurry of bipartisan activity in Congress. Just today, the New York Times, David Leonhardt talked about, he has if you subscribe to the Times, you get an email in the morning that says, you know, today, and in the New York Times. And, you know, the lead story is bipartisanship in Congress, right? So you look at that and you go, you know, it wasn't too long ago, you would never see that as the lead. Why is it a lead? Because the country is starting to push back and say, enough. And so, you know, the work that you all are doing and some of the people that you've interviewed, our organization, and by the way, in this bridging divides, there are over 400 organizations working on this stuff. Right. Our biggest problem is, you know, we're hidden under a rock. Nobody knows about it.
Exactly. And you're right. I'm always surprised when I hear about a new one. And honestly, yours was a new one. I never heard of you guys.
Shame on us. What can I tell you?
Well, shame on us too. It's like 400, you know, I don't know 400. So I got to start looking around. I saw your partners on your website and a lot of them I didn't know about. So I'm going to look them all up. Yeah.
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 So we're working on that. But a lot of the problem on that, Toby, is that, you know, the news media is only now starting to say, you know, there's an interesting story here. And, you know, this is something people care about.
Yeah,
So
you're right.
it's coming. More and more people in the movement are getting some recognition. In our own case, after we did the Susan Rice, David Petraeus event at George Mason University, we were there was a piece about the event on the Today Show, and then afterward in Craig Melvin's program, which he doesn't have now, but it was Craig Melvin Live on MSNBC. He interviewed Eric and me about the work and so forth. So every now and then we pop up, but I think you're going to see the frequency start to grow as of people that are finding common ground, whether they're in the movement or not. But stories about bipartisanship and reaching across the aisle, both in a political, or in a leadership context or a citizen context. You're going to see more and more stories about that because people care. They want to see it. They need that hope and inspiration. And the news media gets it. They know that. It's just not that hot yet, but it's coming.
Yeah, now they can start covering it. And if 60 to 70% of people in the middle are really mad, then now you gave them a simple way to actually do something about it, right? They can look at your score and say, oh, okay, well, I can look at this person, and it's not just not the most angry person, that I have to vote for. That's going to the election. So that's good. That's a simple way to look at it, and a simple. It's not simple, I know, on your side to develop a score, but if you look at the website, and I'll have you tell everybody where it is again in a second, then they can actually take that feeling and then look up their election. Like I looked up on Ballotpedia is one place I'll look.
Yeah, good
and
site,
I see who is coming up here locally in Indianapolis for my election. And then I was able to then look at your website and see the score on those individuals. And that gives me a sense without having to do, 30 days of an investment in my time to figure out these people. And of course, I'm getting mail from them already, but, they're not going to be like, I haven't seen the Common Ground score yet on the mail. So hopefully I will eventually.
Yeah. We hope so too. We think there's a reasonable shot for that to happen. We really do. More, like I said, the Congress, you made the point yourself. Don Bacon, who is the number one guy, he talks about it all the time, as you can imagine. Of course he would, right?
Well, yeah.
So the more people start to do that, we'll see this happen, and more people pay attention to the card. So
yeah, exactly.
To the scorecard.
All right, you could tell our audience again your website and
So the Common Ground Committee is at commongroundcommittee.org, and there's a link at the top of the page, Common Ground Scorecard, or in fact, it is you can get there with its own URL, if you will. You can enter commongroundscorecard.org. Both mechanisms will get you there.
Okay, great. And we'll put, of course, all those links in your social media in our episode descriptions. People can listen to it wherever they find their podcasts. And I think we'll go ahead and end there.
Okay.
So Bruce Bond, thank you so much for joining us today on UnityNow. We appreciate it.
Well, thank you again for inviting me. I very much enjoyed the conversation and appreciate the work you all are doing. So let's keep it going. I think we're on to something.
I agree. All right. We'll see you hopefully soon, and we'll watch Common Ground and see how it affects the voters with the scores.
You bet. Thanks for letting me chat about it. I appreciate it.
Of course. Have a great day.
All right. You too, Toby.
All right.